Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. This is your host, Willem Van Horst. As I announced in the last episode, I'm settling nicely in Chicago on Lake Michigan and getting back into a regular recording schedule with a plan to be publishing every other week or so. And while I might have to compose with a few moving parts over the summer as I get settled in, it seems like things are going in the right direction. And it's quite funny to be here a year later. I was here on vacation a year ago exactly in Chicago, visiting friends just past the 4th of July, and I got to see the fireworks over the lake again. And at the time, I couldn't have predicted I'd be living here a year later. The weather's beautiful at the moment, and of course, everybody keeps reminding me that winter is coming. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying the summer and as much time by Lake Michigan as I can. I'm not far from the lake, and it's really beautiful over there. I was at the beach last weekend and went to play frisbee with some friends in the water. Even though the water is pretty cold, it's still a lake. But it is beautiful. And while I'm not part of the introduction, if you enjoy listening to the show, don't forget, please give the show a rating, subscribe to it, and ideally write a review, 5-star review if you can, or less than that, just get in touch with me and tell me what's wrong with it, on iTunes. So iTunes is the main way that you're listening to podcasts if you have an iPhone. Your podcast app is directly linked to iTunes, so you could either open iTunes on your computer or go to your podcasting app on your phone, and you should be able to leave a rating and a review over there. And if you subscribe and you write a review, that makes a huge difference in having the show appear for more people to discover it and find out about it through Apple's algorithm and how they organize and rank podcasts. Or this works as well. If you enjoy the show, tell a friend about it. Just send the link over to them. Tell them, hey, check out Ice Cream for Everyone, like that. And if you'd like to hear more from me, you can also subscribe to my weekly Ice Cream Sunday email newsletter, in which I share a few links to interesting stories and videos and a few different categories. There's usually a GIF of the week as well. Stuff I've collated and collected from the internet in the week. And you can find all of that, including all the back episodes of the podcast as well on my main website. That's icecreamforeveryone.net. So www.icecreamforeveryone, all spelled out, .net. All right. And you can also like my Facebook page. I publish stuff on Facebook. I should be probably more regular than that with it. But yeah, you can also leave comments for me on Facebook. I check them out. Or you can communicate with me on Twitter as well. My handle is ICWillem. That's letters I, C, and then WILLEM, which is my first name. But enough about me for now. Let's talk about our guests. So if you follow the show, my weekly Ice Cream Sunday email newsletter, you might know that I used to work for and still regularly participate in training and development courses with a company called Landmark Worldwide. And this year I attended for the first time the Conference for Global Transformation, which is an event they organized in, for the first time in Monterey, California this year. Is a really awesome event, really great gathering, a lot of people who come to meet and share whatever it is they're up to in the world and whatever global transformation means to them. So I got to meet and hear from a lot of different amazing people from a wide variety of expertises, topics like Dr. Amy Waterman and her commitment to solve the organ donor shortage in the U.S. She was invited to speak at the White House about this last year. To a really fantastic breakout session from a doctor about treating children and adults with ADD and ADHD and how that all works, how that shows up for people. Another session from a game designer all about designing games, which was really rich. The whole thing was fantastic, rich. I had awesome conversations, met a lot of great people. And out of that, my guest today is Allan Cohen. And Allan was one of the keynote speakers at the conference. He's a management consultant, an entrepreneur, and an executive, and he's been managing his own strategy consulting practice for the past 16 years now. He's worked with clients as varied as Cartoon Network and The Gap and Nickelodeon, Landmark Worldwide, and their business branch called Avanto Group, PepsiCo, IBM, to name a few. So he's worked with a lot of different people. And I heard him, there's two different occasions during the conference I heard him. One was a pre-conference session titled The Case for Naivete and Other Lost Ways of Being, which was a really great session. It was all about considering ways of being and acting that we probably had as children, but that we might have lost on the way to growing up because they were not supposed to be things that grown-ups do. And what if we redefined and reappropriated some of those as grown-ups? Like naivete would be one of them. to go from considering being naive as being taken for a ride and being taken advantage of to what if it was being in awe and wonder of the world in such a way that you can cause things that other people don't think are possible because you don't realize that other people don't think are possible. If I remember correctly, something like that. It was a lot of fun. And another session, his main keynote speech was titled "How to Keep Aliveness in Worsening Circumstances." I think that was the main title. And it was all about taking a look at the kind of people who can have that kind of unwavering enthusiasm or endurance for the work they're doing, even though whatever they're up to might look like the world is not going in their favor and things are not going in their direction and it's not working. How do you keep that going on, even if things don't look up and don't look your way? And that was really great and very inspiring session. And so I enjoyed both sessions so much that I asked Allan if he'd join me for the show. And we had a really great conversation. I had a lot of fun talking about a lot of different topics, from his work and the kind of work he does in strategic consulting, to talking about the big four management consultancies, and then like completely veering off into artificial intelligence and complex adaptive systems, and some mentions of his pro bono work that he does in Israel and Northern Ireland. So altogether, really rich conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And without further ado, here's Allan. Enjoy. Hello, Allan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you very much for making time. I really appreciate it. So, as I was just saying just before the started recording officially, I guess, we met last month at the Conference for Global Transformation that is organized by Landmark Worldwide. And you gave a workshop and another keynote speech that I really appreciated. And I thought it'd be great to have you on the show. Just for the background, I believe from your website, you're a strategic consultant, or how do you usually talk about your title and yourself and your profession?
The very short answer is I'm a strategy consultant.
Yeah.
And that can be misleading. Some people think about a strategy consultant as the person who shows up with the answers, which is not what I do. But I work on I work on the question of what can be done to secure long-term success. So in its purest sense, I'm working on strategy questions. So with clients across all sectors of the economy, public sector, private sector, not-for-profit sector. So
great. Yeah. Excellent. And so one of the reasons I invited you is, so I work on the strategy side, but particularly down to branding, creative communications, and like that. And I've had previous experience in training and development, having worked with Landmark Worldwide back in Paris and London quite a few years ago. And as I've been moving over to the US, and I've been spending a bit of time reformulating what this podcast is about and the kind of conversations that I want to have. And one of the things that interests me the most is like bringing it towards creativity. And I really think in some of the workshop that I attended with you, that there's really some, and I think in my work on the strategy on the creative side of things as well, that there is, or can be, a creative act to really be developing strategies for clients as well as workshops on my end. And I thought it'd be really interesting to have your perspective within your industry. But we'll come back to the whole professional side of things. I'd really love to learn more about yourself to start with. So where are you from?
Okay, sure. I grew up in Connecticut, just maybe 2 hours south of Boston. And after a rather boring childhood, went off to become an engineer. I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. And that was sort of the beginning of escaping from Connecticut. And I've lived all over the United States since. So it's so where I'm from is, sometimes I say Connecticut.
Okay. So, wait, this sounds interesting. Like, what was boring about your childhood then?
What to say about that? It was, I grew up in a family with a dog, a cat, a fence, and 2 cars. You know, the lawn was green, the school buses were yellow. It was a very suburban, sort of the 60s American dream, I think. Uh-huh. So, in retrospect, at the time, I had no idea it was boring. of course. It was the only reality I knew.
Yeah.
But as I've gone out into the world and now relate to it, it's quite boring and not really very much a part of me. And that state or that experience, not so much a part of me anymore. Obviously, my family still is, but I don't really think of myself as a Connecticut Yankee or anything.
Got it. And do you have siblings?
I have an older brother.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so, aside within the kind of quite traditional white picket fence environment that you're describing, what were your kind of favorite interests or activities when growing up?
Wow. Probably science fiction. And, this was the age of a more informal childhood in the 60s. So we played, all the sports were pickup sports as opposed to organized sports. Uh-huh. And so I loved to play outside and, hang out with the other kids. There was no internet, there wasn't even Pong yet. So there was none of the usual distractions that there are today.
Yeah. And it's an interesting one. And so on the science fiction, this is interesting because I quite like my fantasy and science fiction, both in books and gaming form and a bunch of other stuff. Did you read a lot of science fiction or?
Sure, I did. Probably the first influence might have been Isaac Asimov.
Yeah.
And the Foundation trilogy was a big impact on me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, on television, it was Star Trek and Doctor Who. Those were the 60s, real science fiction of the 60s.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. So how would you say Foundation what kind of impact did it have, do you think?
Well, I began to see, I'll say this, I encountered an intellect, which I imagine was Asimov's intellect, that I had not encountered in grade school. The grade school curriculum doesn't have much intellectual stimulation. And so for me, science fiction was a real engagement of my intellect and imagining, not just the imagination, but also the ideas that make those worlds coherent. So, as Asimov, as many that Heinlein and all the other I think classic science fiction writers created whole worlds that were internally coherent, which requires a certain kind of genius to create. And so encountering that was very eye-opening for me.
Very cool.
And then of course, thanks to Mr. Scott on Star Trek, got an engineering degree, which I'd never used professionally, but I actually have the degree.
Right. I was going to ask, what geared you towards that particular direction? Was it to study engineering? Was there a particular? Do you remember how you chose that?
Yeah, I do. All right. So my dad was an engineer, but I didn't quite understand what engineering really was because I was 16 or 17. And you're picking the university. Yeah. And but I was very good in math and science, and so I assumed I should do what I'm very good at. Mistaken assumption, but the one I had. And I said to my dad over dinner, I don't know whether to be a scientist or an engineer. And he said, well, I'll give you a test. Test right there at the dinner table. He goes, okay. I said, give me the test. This is a short test, so don't panic. So he goes, oh, there's a beautiful woman on the other side of the room from you, and every step you take toward her, you cut the distance exactly in half. I said, okay. And then the question he has is, will you ever be able to kiss her? And I say, well, of course. And he says, well, how are you going to do that? And I said, well, I'll get close enough, I'll lean forward, and I'll kiss her. And he goes, engineer. Because for a scientist, there's abstractly, you'll never reach her, so you can never kiss her, right? But to an engineer, it's all practicality. So he is horrified to this day, he's in his 80s, that is actually why I chose an engineering major and not a science major. It was intended as a joke.
That is fantastic. That's a fantastic story. I really love it.
Yeah. So that was it. So off I went.
Right. And what kind of engineer was your father? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was a mechanical engineer. Thermodynamics was his specialty, so he worked on nuclear reactors. And and I took mechanical engineering.
Got it.
But I realized in the program this was not for me, even though I was very good at it. So I was, honor student, but not happy.
Right.
So I never worked as an engineer. I completed the degree. Yeah. And then got my MBA quite directly after that, and moved into something a little more creative.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So how was that? How did that happen within the MBA, and how did you like it? And how did you gear towards the following next steps in your career then?
Well, I love the MBA. It was another eye-opening experience, particularly seeing how engineers were related to by management. I always thought engineers had some special status. We were creating the world, right? That's the idea an engineer has. But to management, an engineer is just another worker that produce a particular output.
Yes.
And they're treated like a bricklayer. And it was so shocking, I have to say, when I got into my MBA and see, case studies where engineers were involved. I was like, holy cow, you can't talk about engineers that way, was my first thought, my mind.
Right.
Fortunately, I did not say it out loud. But it was, again, eye-opening. And I enjoyed the, I guess it's only loosely speaking a profession management. It's not clearly defined. It's not clearly structured the way something like engineering or architecture or say medicine is. So you really have a lot of free range when you're studying management. So I enjoyed the freedom, I have to say.
Were there any particular standouts in terms of influences or books or teachers?
I had mentors there. But I guess the way they stood out was they pushed me intellectually. Yeah. I guess that's the way they stood out. And they all wanted me to get a doctorate, trying to convince me I was not cut out to wake up at 8 a.m. every day. That was their enrollment conversation for me. And I said, well, it's true. I'm not cut out to get up at 8 every morning, but that doesn't mean I have to be a professor, right? So I did not stay perpetually in the university. So
very cool.
Yeah.
And let's see what's next. So you were talking about how it was a little bit more creative. In what ways in particular would you say that the MBA or the curriculum that you're following or the kinds of studies? I think the intellectual stimulation is one thing, but a little bit, anything more about that?
Yeah. So let's see. I don't know what to say, but I enjoyed very much the economics and the finance coursework because I could actually, coming from engineering, I actually understood the underlying mathematics of what was going on. So it made that particularly interesting for me. But the thing that caught my attention is the human factor. So the question of what makes an economy work, used to be a very big abstraction. Now there's behavioral economists, but it was this big abstraction that all humans were making decisions that maximize their own personal gain. Right. Now, we now know that's not true, but by making that assumption, you remove the humanity of people. But as the other coursework, how do you lead an enterprise? What is strategy? What is, how do you improve an operation? All those questions, which was the rest of the curriculum, really. And marketing, it was all a question about what has humans operate the way they operate and how in the world do we ever get ourselves together to produce a result? Yes. It's a miracle. It's a total miracle. It still astonishes me to this day that human beings have managed to get together to produce results together.
Yes.
And it is, of course, the aspect of humans which gave us the planet. This little weak primate. Even amongst primates, we shouldn't have been destined to take over.
Yeah.
And primates are not a particular class of animal you can just look around and just see how they survive in the jungle on the edge, right? So it is our capacity to combine our efforts that actually gave us the planet, and of course jeopardizes the planet today, but nevertheless gave us this planet, and it's no bottom to that question about how difficult that is, how complicated that is, how mysterious it is.
Yeah.
That we can somehow communicate sufficiently and align our energies to produce results together. So that was that is pretty much what I think about ever since that training in management. It has been sort of my terrain.
That is absolutely fascinating. I completely agree. And in particular, as there's more and more of us on the planet, and companies, organizations, societies, nations are increasingly complex. Cities are increasingly complex systems. It's even more baffling how actually, in this, how a company operates together, or how a brand can be seen by the same thing by millions of people. And there's like thousands of people that are somehow doing something for it to be working that way. But in what way is completely open and perhaps bottomless question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And so I understand. So you've been working for yourself in the past, more than 15 years or something like that?
Yeah, since, I do have right after 9/11, I decided to be an independent practitioner. So that's 2001. So, 16 years now.
So how did that work to do the jump from like having an employer to creating your own business? Because that's a really interesting one, I think.
Well, I was in a consulting firm, and it's the consulting firm in the United States famous for having created and I'll say the brand or the product called reengineering. So okay. I was in that consulting firm from its early days as a juggernaut. I joined them in 1990 when they were about 60 consultants, and they became 600 consultants before I left 5 years later. And reengineering, because I don't think I know is that a that was a type of practice, or it was a movement in management in the early 90s that posited the idea that you should stop thinking about businesses as a set of functions and start thinking as a set of processes. Okay, not that brilliant, but then to say the way you deal with these processes is not incrementally, but to reconceive them entirely end to end, and that when you try to change things in the middle of a process, it's too constrained by the edges. So you've got to take the processes end to end. The thinking has now been embedded in code. SAP, Oracle, all those giant enterprise resource planning systems essentially have embedded end-to-end process thinking.
Right.
But in the early 90s, all of the automation was functionally oriented. In fact, systems couldn't even talk to each other, let alone run transactions across them. So back in the early 90s, it was sort of considered the sexy thing to be working on, and we promoted it with a book called Reengineering the Corporation, which was a blockbuster bestseller in the 90s. So as a consulting firm, what that meant was we sat back and the phone rang, and people asked for teams. And we'd say, what do you want to re-engineer? And they'd say, we don't know. We just want you guys to come find something to re-engineer here. It was that crazy. So great. I left there and started a strategy consulting house, which a partner and I built for 4 or 5 years, and then we sold that. I was an executive in the acquiring company for a couple of years. They were an e-business consultancy. So it was right around the first .com boom. And then that boom collapsed right before 9/11. You may recall the era. And so that's when I went as an independent. But I'd already started companies and built companies. So being independent was more about choosing a life of freedom than about sort of wealth creation. I'd already done the wealth creation thing. Right. And I thought, if I work for myself, I can actually choose what I work on and how much of my time is spent in economic activity, how much is spent pro bono like that. So that's been the last 16 years. So it's worked out. That's
very, very cool. And so what do you think are some of the qualities that for yourself that you brought in that were particularly useful in both building companies and working as an independent? Or either, if they're different. I don't
know. Let's see. So what quality helped me in building a company? I suppose, that's an interesting question. I guess the number one role I've played in all the companies I've built is creating the practice that gets delivered. So it's invention, I guess. That was, if we were a product company, I would have been the chief science officer. Right. But we were a consulting company, so I was basically the chief consulting officer. I invented the consulting services that we provided and trained the consultants to deliver it, basically. So, and we were acquired for that invention. They wanted our practice, and they took our people. But then that worked out very well for all of us, both our people and the 2 founding partners. So that was quite a lucky break. So it all turned out. But the thing I think is singularly most valuable in building a startup, which my partner had, is an intuitive capacity to make the right choice. My partner is the marketing genius behind reengineering, by the way. He was the marketing guy. Okay. He was not a field consultant. He was the senior partner in our little consulting firm, and he had a ability to see the patterns and make the right choice. And there's no substitute for that. I think that, risk taking, yes, but the intuition, what gets called intuition, I think, is you have to have that at the top of a startup.
Mm.
You can't brute your way through with pure trial and error and analytics. That will not cut it, I don't believe.
Yeah, interesting.
So I got that from my partner.
Fantastic.
I have to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. And this is really interesting because it kind of points out to that there, or at least that's the way I'm interpreting it. I don't know what you think, but that there always needs to be that somehow a balance between the emotional human intuition and the analytics, the math, and everything else. And it seems to me from the outside that a lot of the processes or big consulting firms, or as you're pointing out to like Oracle or SAP, are trying to find the underlying mathematics and the formula that is going to eliminate all human input. But then again, if you do that, then it just doesn't work anymore. I don't know what you think of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it doesn't work yet. But, the holy grail of what gets referred to as artificial intelligence. Now, having gone to Rensselaer Polytech, I still have a lot of friends who work on the leading edge of engineering.
Uh-huh.
And they've always told me that artificial intelligence is short for what we can't yet do with computers. It's a shorthand for whatever it is. So the term itself has meant very different things depending on what decade it's used.
Yeah.
But the current thing it's meaning, which is learning algorithms, right? Neural nets that learn.
Yes.
Something's coming that will, in fact, replace a lot of human contribution. I'm quite convinced of that, and I don't know how we're going to adapt to it, either economically or socially. But so far, we've been the most adaptive animal, and so I'm an optimist that we will adapt.
Yeah.
But I would agree, up until the kind of programming that I learned when I was in engineering school, which is still in some way, what's called structured linear programming, and it's referred to as object-oriented, which is basically chunks of structured linear programming. And so it's a logic flow, a bunch of if-then statements.
Uh-huh.
And, if this, then the computer does that, right? So it's all predetermined. That idea of controlling life and controlling living systems is inadequate. So for sure, that will never carry the day. And I'm not against those systems, but they only play a certain role in an enterprise. And but what's coming next may be a bit of a shocker. It's this thing that's self-driving cars over some of the first applications that average civilian could actually see, which is jaw-dropping.
Yes.
If you actually think about what has been accomplished, the fact that they haven't been running into walls constantly or moving people, it's stunning.
Yeah.
And that could never have been programmed the old way as a linear set of logical routines.
Yes, and so I've been reading a tiny bit about that. I attended a whole evening when was it? At the end of last year at King College in London, all about artificial intelligence and some of the latest that was going on. The guy who created SwiftKey, so that's an input keyboard also that has like a limited kind of like neural net learning processes. And then of course, the big example from last year was is it called Deep Blue, the computer that won a Go, and which is a limited utility. But one of the most interesting things about that particular story, I thought, was before that happened, they didn't know it was going to happen. Everybody was predicting like the computer would win at Go within 5 to 10 years. But then when it won the tournament, they didn't understand how it had won the tournament. The computer had been learning something by itself that they didn't really follow exactly how it happened. So that was just, it is, there's a lot coming that direction that I have no idea what it's going to look like, but I'm excited about it as well. Yeah. So that's, very exciting.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Quite a tangent from enterprise resource planning systems, but the role that I don't even know what to call it, but constructed intelligence will play in the future is going to be, I think, jaw dropping, and our generation will just have to get out of the way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
but that's a lot of what they're talking about in jobs being eliminated. I remember seeing this talk about the future of transport and somebody imagining that it would be probably pods that are in multiple vertical levels that assemble and disassemble themselves just based on the flow of traffic and where people want to go. Of course, all managed by some systems that we would have no idea how it works.
Yes.
By that point, yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
And the assumption is that they won't replace the creativity jobs. That's sort of the current, what I call wishful thinking. But they're already producing creative product. So music is being generated by these things, new creative music. I don't know what exactly it's going to take for us to declare the Turing test has been passed, but it seems to me we passed it a while ago. There's even the premise that recorded music will be gone. All music will be spontaneously generated to match your taste. So you won't be listening to the same recorded song over and over again. You'll be listening to, for lack of a better term, composing algorithms that compose music that delights you. And it's just that one-time listen. It'll never exist again.
Wow.
So just to give you an example of, if it could replace musicians, composing musicians, not just interpreting musicians, but composing musicians, there's really hard to see what it wouldn't do. Absolutely. And that's why I think the whole thing's somewhat astonishing. But yeah,
it is completely. And just to make sure, like for anybody who hasn't heard about it, can you just describe the Turing test?
I probably have to look it up to get the exact details. The high concept is that when you can't distinguish a computer's output from a human's output, then it has passed the test. It is no longer what we thought of as a computer, or maybe it's what we could describe as sentient. And he has some structure for how to perform that test.
And some of the structure, in particular, the way that it was originally put out was there was one person in a room with a computer, and you're actually typing and messaging from the robot, and trying to distinguish through questions whether you're talking to a computer or to a real human. Which today, that particular test through messaging can be completely passed by a messaging bot. Actually, the last year I was working with a digital marketing agency who we were working on messaging bots. And messaging bots, you can pretty easily pass a test just pretending to be a human being. And there's like tons and tons of them around the internet that are hanging around.
Yeah. Yeah. So so we live in an interesting time.
We do, absolutely.
For anyone who participates in the economy, essentially, in any capacity, it's an interesting time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. Another line of questions I was kind of thinking about that I was reading up about it, and that seems to be of interest to the whole industry, is some larger trends from the big four consulting groups, so like the Deloitte, McKinsey, like that, have been acquiring, I believe, in the past however many years, like a bunch of strategic consulting firms, but also creative design and digital agencies. So I know that when it comes to the creative design marketing industries, that they're disrupting a lot and like threatening the big communications groups. I don't know, do you have any observations about them buying strategic consulting and how that's changing? Is that changing any of your side of the equation?
Well, I don't have inside information. I used to consult to those big guys way back when. Right. Believe it or not, I was their consultant. So, which is a strange thing to be the consultant to the consulting industry. But I have not done that for more than 10 years. Here's my assessment from the outside, so not having inside information, that those players have very simple structures for their economics, and when they stop working, they have to acquire.
Right.
So what I would suggest is that the heart of their business, which is large systems implementations and the consulting that wraps around that, for those guys, the particular ones you mentioned, is not producing what they need it to produce the way it used to produce it. And my guess is that's because of cloud computing and certain other flexible infrastructures that just make the job easier for everybody. So I think they still have business, but the projects are much smaller. Right. Be my guess.
Yeah.
So therefore they've had to find new economic engines, and they're just looked around and said, well, we're good at professional services. What else do our buyers buy? They buy those things. Well, let's see if we can, we're full service. Sure. Let's do it. Accenture's always had a strategy arm. So, but it has really operated in the orbit, I think, of their operational consulting. So maybe if they were to acquire something that was really pure strategy service, it would be quite a different model for them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And when it comes to your work, you mentioned at the beginning that you've worked with a lot of different clients, different industries, different verticals. And just looking at your website, you mentioned that some of your specialties are really about producing breakthrough results.
Yes.
However, it sounds like it could be just about anything. Do you specialize in an area in particular, or?
Yeah. So, all right, good question. So here's I once had a private equity guy who was referring me to his investment base, I guess is what to say about it. He was plugging me in somewhere. I said, well, how'd you know to plug me in? He goes, I got you filed under I in my, this is, all right, old people talk, in my Rolodex.
Uh-huh.
I said, filed under I? What does I stand for? He goes, impossible. So when I've got one of my investments that the circumstances are impossible, I tell them to talk to you. So that's the way I've now described my niche. Is the strategic problems that occur as impossible. So, and that can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
And it could be driven by being out of sync with an external shift, or by aspiring to something that's way outside of what was possible in the past. So either one of those conditions can show up in pretty much any enterprise. So yeah. So that's been the work. That's
a great story and a great reputation to be able to develop, because it's been like some of my questions over the past few months as well. I really enjoy nothing more than to be able to work with a company on, let's work out what the challenge or the opportunity is, whatever that might be. However, I found it difficult to get a way in when they're like, well, what do you specialize in? Like, why am I talking to you? And I'm like, well, I can solve any problems. Like, sometimes anything is nothing.
That's right. You become Dr. Smith's medicine oil. It's good for cancer and gout, coincidentally, right? It's like, really? Yeah, I don't think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's nice to have, but one way to think about that is to say, what are the challenges I'm, on the one hand, most effective at addressing? So there's certain circumstances, what I do is most called for. And then on the one hand, and on the other hand, what actually do I enjoy, and actually just declare that's my focus.
Yeah.
So for me, because for the last, 15 or so years since I've been independent, the practice of transformation has rippled through my work, and so transformation, is the alchemy. You call it organizational alchemy. How do you turn something that's been one substance? The transmutation of metal. That's what alchemy was. One of alchemy's main goals.
Yes.
So how do I take something that has always been, in an alchemist case, let's say lead, its whole existence, and treat it in some way that it's now gold, right? So, okay, turn lead into gold. That's a transformation. So for an enterprise, the question is, by the way, the value of turning lead to gold was always obvious. How to do it, less so. And this is the same in organizational life. The value of transforming an organization into something it has never been. The value of that's very clear. How to do it, not so obvious. And there's not a lot of people who specialize in that. So for me, declaring the space called impossible aims into that space, because impossible is another way to say there's a demand for that kind of alchemy present. And if being lead is sufficient, then transmuting yourself into another metal is a ridiculous exercise. Right? Yes. Why put everybody through it? So I don't want those even though you can apply these practices of transformation to any business problem, I don't believe that's appropriate. I think it ought to be aimed at places where there's no way out other than transformation. Or what you might call breakthrough.
Yeah.
So, right? So literally being able to break through a wall that seems impenetrable, so also one more thing. If you found yourself in a room with no windows or walls, you'd get real interested in what it takes to walk through a wall. Otherwise, walking through walls is a ridiculous thing to take on.
Yes.
If there's a door, do not take on walking through walls. It's crazy.
Yes.
Right? So I'm looking for the rooms with no windows and doors and calling that my focus for strategic exercise. Yeah.
Awesome. I really love the alchemy analogy, and actually that leads me to just kind of think, okay, so for those kind of transmutations and the kind of challenges that you're looking to support businesses with, and I think this is where, I mean, I'm kind of like bringing in the idea of creativity. What are because you need ingredients, processes, things like that for the transmutation of one metal for another, and to test like, how do I need it? Do I need a bit of this kind of powder? Does it need to be a particular heat? Do I need to turn it into a liquid? Whatever. So, and I think I like to think that that's where the creativity might be coming in. Or so, do you have any particular ingredients that might be either influences or things that give you the ideas for what might be useful for the transmutation work, if you will?
Yeah. So, let me just say. So, even in the formulation of say, where are we going? So, we're currently led. What do we want to be? Is gold the right metal or something else? Right.
Yes.
So, even in that, even to address that question, I have to transform myself.
Yes.
So, the leadership team itself would need to transmute itself from somebody that ran the business the way they've always run it to a group capable of imagining some authentic alternative to that, something completely different, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But the cases where I'm most interested are when the whole enterprise has to do that, not just so that what we're counting on are the workforce of an enterprise or an organization, that they themselves need to produce the new business. We're not going to do it through an acquisition. This is not Amazon buying Whole Foods, right? That was a transformative move, no question. But it didn't so far require anything from the people inside Amazon, right? Just their leadership team to envision that possibility. So fine, but now I like the challenge called, we are going to take the people we currently got and have them operate in an entirely new way. And so when I'm in that space, and that's your question was like, what's the ingredient that I'm not sure, that occurs to me as most useful in that circumstance is the kind of conversation that leaves people able to release the past. So that's, for me, that's the magic. It's not so hard to get people to think differently. All do, in deference to the great innovation consultancies and design consultancies. I mean, I love what they do, but I don't think that's the biggest problem. Very few organizations have a shortage of ideas. But being able to execute an idea that's fundamentally at odds with the past kinds of success. Every successful experience we have is another constraint in our minds. That's right. So every time we have success, we determine what the source of the success was, rightly or wrongly. We attribute it.
Yes.
And then it becomes a wall that we do not penetrate anymore. It becomes a tunnel down which we go. And so when you're asking an enterprise, which has had obviously some level of success to even exist, right? So you're asking an enterprise to transform itself. You're asking people to release all those walls. All the lessons of success in the past have to be let go, at least long enough to imagine something completely different. Then you can pick those up again, but you'll see them differently. So the magic or the alchemy is what has people let go, what has people release all those certainties that they have about how things work. And I don't have just one way to do that, and I would love to meet somebody that had the most reliable way to do that. So for me, it's a very creative exercise to figure out, for this circumstance, these people, this much time, here are and this much willingness to be introspective, right? Yeah. All those factors that you then design conversations for them to be in, or inquiries for them to be in, at the end of which they've got to have a kind of freedom to be different people. So yeah, that's for me, it's a very creative exercise.
Yeah, I agree. That's brilliant. Thank you. Very interesting. How about let's talk about some of the pro bono work that you've done. There was like a few different projects or things that listed on your website that seemed to be quite interesting, that you either nonprofit organizations that you seem to be contributing to, or different projects that you've done. You talk a bit about, perhaps your favorite or one that's ongoing.
Sure. Well, I'll be in Israel next week on one, so that's top of mind.
All right.
So I can say that pretty consistently for the last 15 years, I spend about a third of my time on pro bono projects. So this is part of being a free person.
Wow.
Probably over that time, there's an organization called the Mastery Foundation, which uses sort of the transformational philosophy of Werner Erhard, which is the same philosophy, Landmark's built around, and but applied to places. In this case, the parts I work on of the mission are to apply it in places where religious identity has separated people. So the notion is, I'll step back a second just to say what Mastery Foundation is. The world's religions, if you look at the founders, both Eastern and Western religions, the founders of those religions all went through profound transformation. So regardless of your position on divinity and God's existence, it's obvious and clear they went through profound transformations and then sought to make those transformations available to others. What becomes an organized religion is the attempt to make this available. And it's in the pure teachings of every faith. It's almost impossible not to notice it if you look, right? So then look at the world and you go, well, I don't see very much of that going on. It's very rare. And we refer to them as certain mystical offshoots like the Sufis in the Muslim world. And, so we have little words for them if there's these little exceptions. But for the most part, the world's religions are not providing access to real human transformation to the followers. So what happened? And so the Mastery Foundation formed to provide transformational tools to frontline clergy in all faiths and spiritual traditions. And one of the worst thing religion has done. So besides losing the transformation that the founders went through, it's there, but it's really, it's not transferred. So besides that, the toughest thing has been religion setting themselves up in opposition to each other. Has been the toughest thing. And so turning people into religious identities. And so that was a long background to. I work in those places for the Mastery Foundation with people committed to transcending or transforming the circumstances where religious identity is part of the conflict. So I work in Northern Ireland, and I work in Israel with Jews and Palestinians, Northern Ireland with Protestants and Catholics. And to be clear, in both cases, religious identity is not the main story. It is a part of the story, but it is a particularly tenacious part. It allows you to say God is on your side. Yeah. In addition to everything else, in addition to we're fighting over land, we're fighting over control, we're fighting over nationality, we're fighting over a lot of things. But to be able to say, and I am fighting with God's support, is a pernicious aspect to human conflict. So I'll be in Israel next week having this very conversation about breakthrough. I will be talking about rooms with no windows and doors with Palestinians and Jews who are clearly in that condition, and promising them over the next 3 days, you're going to get access to being able to walk through walls. So that's the work there.
Wow.
So I'm excited to be going again. It's a overbooked program, as it always is there, and we'll be 3 days. Actually, it's 4 days. It's a 4-day program. So yeah. So that I get to co-lead, and we're. Last thing to say that's joyful for me about that is that we're training a team of Palestinians and Jews in Israel to lead that program. So
wow, that's exciting,
and it's going very, very well. So yeah.
And the type of people participating, do they tend to be either religious leaders, community leaders, or anybody, or people that people particularly committed to, or interacting with? Well, I don't know. Yes, please tell me. It was like extrapolating, but.
Yeah, we have a long list of criteria, but sort of the high concept is that they are committed to a shared future,
right?
That crosses those lines, that crosses those identity divides, and they are at work doing something about it, whether it's their full-time job or their passion in their volunteer work. And in Northern Ireland, that turns out to be 20 to maybe 20% of those people are, in fact, religious leaders. In Israel, it's very few, but it's a few. it's mostly what they refer to as secular. The Palestinian and Jewish populations in that region are largely secular, largely not members of. They have a religious identity, but they're not necessarily inside a mosque or a synagogue.
Right.
So it's mostly in the case of Israel and Palestine, it's mostly community leaders. So they'll be principals of schools, people who run nonprofits, social workers who do conflict resolution. It's a whole large number of people, and that might qualify for this. But they're either bridge builders or they're empowering disenfranchised people to get a seat at the table. Those sorts of commitments in life. So the ticket in, it's actually offered free to these participants, right? And so they go, how can you give us away for free? I said, free. They gave their whole lives for this, and we give them a few days, right? Mm-hmm. So the entry cost is enormous to get in, right? It's an enormous cost. Wow. And, but it's not paid to us.
Yeah. And so I saw the website for the Mastery Foundation, so I'll put that in the show notes. But just for anybody who might be listening, and if they're interested in, is there any way particularly they can be contributing, or I don't know if it's an NGO that raises funds or anything like that, or if there's anybody that might be interested in getting involved with the Mastery Foundation, is there anything in particular for them to know? Or
So if masteryfoundation.org is the website, if they surf that site and poke around, what I've heard is, some people just start crying because they found their community, right? So, and if that happens to somebody, they should immediately send an email. I think it's info@masteryfoundation.org. And so I was reading your website and started crying. And there isn't, we don't have a volunteer coordinator, so it's pretty individualistic as to what way you participate. We certainly have donors. Most of our donors and sponsors also participate in some way. It's there's only one full-time staff member that's paid, and everybody else is volunteer, but it's not envelope stuffing volunteers. It's program leaders, it's branding people, it's designers, it's every profession, lawyers, every profession that keeps this nonprofit going are both supporters, but often are volunteers. So
got it.
So the thing to do is look at the website and see if it calls.
Yeah, great, perfect. Yeah. Cool. So we're going to be just wrapping up, and I usually finish with what I call a cool down questions, because it's still we're the Ice Cream for Everyone podcast. I try to have like an ice cream related question, but I'm just getting back into gear and getting back into my reporting feed. So let's just start with the easy one. I don't know if you like ice cream, and if yes, do you have a favorite flavor?
Yeah, I suppose. This is going to sound really boring, but it's French vanilla is my favorite ice cream. And I think because I won't even say why. I love French vanilla. I choose French vanilla. That is my choice.
Great. Perfect. There's nothing wrong, and I don't think it's a particularly boring choice. It's the choice of like a lot of different people, either that or chocolate. Even though there has been a lot more of a trend lately towards like quite fancy and modern ice cream parlors with exotic flavors. I don't know if you've heard of Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams, which is it's a few places in Ohio and Chicago, and I tried something like the other day that was a corn syrup, cream, and moonshine ice cream.
Yeah, the artisan ice creams. I just saw on Facebook that someone's come out with pizza flavored ice cream. At this point, you have to wonder if civilization is going to collapse, right? Pizza flavored ice cream. What is going on, right?
Yes.
But okay.
Yes. Another part of the show, so I'm particularly interested in play and games, and I talked to a few different game designers. Do you, or have you had any history of playing games?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The game I loved the most were the games we invented as kids. Mm-hmm. So this is because we didn't have, so we would play games. You'd get together and go, let's play town, and we would invent those games. Everything else has been a not quite as good experience since then. But, I play I have certain apps on my iPhone, like certain dragon games that don't require more than 3 minutes of interaction, and I can put it down.
Right.
I like those games.
Yeah.
What I don't like for me in my current life is a game that the longer you spend in it, the better you do. That's not a good game for me.
Okay.
That's dangerous. So the games, it's just too dangerous because I'd be likely to spend enormous amounts of time in those things.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I never got into some of those like massively multiplayer online games that World of Warcraft or the like, when I saw friends like sinking extreme amounts of hours, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Although it's sort of attractive from the outside looking at it. I could see enjoying that, but I'm staying away from those things and missing the way it was when I was a kid. Missing those, I know, let's put on a play. Let's have a parade. And the game got invented, and it was a real game with rules.
Yes.
For moving the, like a game, not like just play it. Well, they now have live action role play. That's clearly a game. It's not just acting. It's a game, right?
Yeah.
With rules of interaction and all that. So in a certain way, I was in live action role play, when I was, 6 to 12 years old.
Yes.
It was all live action role play.
Yeah, you just add a little bit more complexities to the whole thing afterwards. And I've done a little bit of live action role play, but I play a lot of tabletop role playing games and contribute to another friend's podcast where we talk about the theory of all these different kinds of particularly tabletop games. It's I think it's just the same as what we did as children, but just a little bit more sophisticated because we're grown-ups now. Even though we're still playing witches and warriors, but cool.
Yeah.
And another point. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sorry to get serious during cool down, but just to say,
no, go ahead.
There's a theorist at University of Michigan named John Holland, who's one of the sort of lead thinkers in complex adaptive systems theory. And he's quite clear that it is those table games that humans invented for ourselves, maybe for amusement, that gave us a capacity for abstract modeling and gave us mathematics and gave us sort of the modern world, that had it not been for closed systems with rules for interaction that a table game provides, this is just what math is. It's a closed system with rules for interaction. So we would never have invented those abstract systems had we not been playing games. Amusing, yes, but also maybe quite consequential in human history.
Yeah, that's some of the reasons that I'm interested in the whole thing. But I didn't know that. Is it Joe Holland?
John Holland.
John Holland. I'll have to check him out.
Yeah.
Cool. And I'll put them in the show notes. The last question I was going to ask is, how about a recommendation for one fiction and one nonfiction book that you either read recently or that is one of your favorites?
Oh, my God. All right. So I'm always reading so many books, and I'm not,
Are you the kind that has like multiple on the go all the time?
Yeah, but I never finish any of them, so I always feel a little like my integrity's out if I recommended them. I don't know why this popped into my head, but I'm just going to say, for nonfiction, one of my favorite books of all time for nonfiction is written. It's written in Spanish, but as an English translation, it's The Reign of Gold. It's the sort of Gone. My girlfriend describes it as the Gone with the Wind of Mexico. It takes a historic era in Mexican history and traces a young girl's experience of it. Lluvia de Oro in Spanish. But it works incredibly well in English. You don't have to read it in Spanish. Just a brilliant, sweeping novel.
Okay.
Nonfiction. So now I'm going to recommend a particular John Holland book. It's called Hidden Order. There you go. And I'll say why. Because for me, Hidden Order, which is one of the first scholarly works written about complex adaptive systems theory, makes available a whole new idea about the physical world and the living world and the relationship between the two. So it really gives you math for a living system. And it's not like any other mathematics that we have. This is why John Holland was so interested in modeling, because he's creating a new world of modeling. How do you model living things? And, it's called Hidden Order because living things have no predictability. And all of other mathematical modeling is about predictive models, essentially. I can model something and I'll know what's going to happen to it next. And with a living system, you can model it, but you still don't know what's going to happen next, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So that's my nonfiction book. Hidden
Fantastic.
Order.
Well, this was great. We really, really appreciate your time, Allan. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. was great to get to know you.
Yeah.
A great conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So just to make sure that people know where to find you, if ever they want to, I'll put that in the show notes. But your main website is allancohen.com, or is that right?
Yeah, allancohen.com. That's correct.
Great. Perfect. And is there anywhere that you're going to be seen or speaking anytime soon for anybody who might be in those areas? Or
I don't have anything for the general public coming up. I only speak at conferences occasionally. So yeah,
okay.
But mostly in private venues.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time and have a fantastic day.
All right. Great to talk to you. Bye-bye.
This is precisely the 44th episode of Published, including all the different short updates. So in a little less than 3 years, given I started, in December 2014, and I had several breaks over the course of several months, as last year moving from France to London, this year moving from London to Chicago. So altogether, pretty good going, I think. 44 episodes in just under 3 years, and hopefully looking for much more of a future as I grow and get back into focusing on the podcast. So thank you for listening to the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And talking about growth, if you've enjoyed it, I hope you can share with a friend. That would be amazing. If you can tell a friend about it, send them a link to the file via email or share it on your favorite social network. Tell other people about it so that more people can discover the show and more people can subscribe and more people can leave ratings and reviews. And don't forget, if you have feedback, questions, or comments, I'd also love to hear from you. You can contact me on Twitter, and my handle is ICWillem, the letters I and C, and then Willem, W-I-L-L-E-M. You can post a comment on the Ice Cream for Everyone Facebook page. You can send me a message via my website. That's www.icecreamforeveryone.net. Or my email directly. That's Willem, W-I-L-L-E-M, at icecreamforeveryone.net. I will be organizing another recording and editing another episode very soon, so watch out for another episode coming out in about a couple of weeks or so. And till next time, bye. Have a great day, evening, morning, whatever time it is for you.